Last video, I tickled your fancy with talk of a DIY floss storage system, and today you actually get to see it. Before we do get onto the reveal though, we're going to go over the how and why I achieved all of this, so strap in because once again I'm going to share probably a bit too much about how my brain works. If you're new here today, hello, my name is Michelle and I love to do all of the crafts, but especially the stitchy ones. My videos cover cross-stitch, yarn crafts and etc, but right now we're in the middle of a craft room makeover, so hopefully that makes for some interesting content. I don't know. All I do know is if I don't make a video about it, it doesn't get done. So, on that note, floss storage. I've been planning to do this for well over a year at this point. My early floss collection was kept nice and neatly bobbinated in this box right here, but of course as I bought more and more colours for more and more projects, I quickly outgrew it. And on top of that, I discovered that I kind of hate working from bobbins, so I stopped doing it. But I also couldn't decide what to replace that system with. And that's how I've ended up with various project bags that may or may not actually be for a particular project, and this big sack of off-brand nonsense. Luckily, my innate desire to have everything in life controlled via spreadsheet has stopped this getting too out of control, because I keep various notes on what's kitted up or stashed where. But obviously this is kind of a terrible system, and if you're sitting there thinking that looks familiar and you're in the same boat, maybe you should feel attacked, because this is bad. So there are lots of options really. Some people like to keep their skeins intact and sort them into drawers or bags until they're needed for a project. Others put everything onto some plastic contraption called a stitch bow and organise them pleasingly in a binder. And others go with floss drops. I'm not going to go into detail on the pros and cons of literally every possible floss storage method because that would take ages. But if you are interested in a deep dive on that subject, let me know and I'll see what I can do. As you've no doubt gathered, I settled on floss drops. After a bit of experimentation where I used the skeins themselves as a sort of stand-in for floss drops, I just found that that really suits the way I stitch. Having all the strands pre-cut to the appropriate length is obviously really cool, but also being able to take just one strand at a time is a game changer when you spend all of your time crafting on the couch and are sick of standing up to find yourself trailing a random assortment of cut threads everywhere. I also like to keep and use lengths of floss that are probably a little bit shorter than what most people would bother with, and I just found reattaching those to bobbins was kind of an annoyance and it looks a mess. So to backtrack for a moment then, what exactly are floss drops? They're essentially just a sort of tag with a hole in them that you can tie pre-cut lengths of floss to. They're made out of cardboard, plastic, clay. It really doesn't matter as long as they're sturdy enough. I'll show you exactly how they work as we go, so don't worry if this sounds like gibberish. So Operation Floss Drop was split into two dilemmas. Dilemma 1, sourcing or making the floss drops inexpensively enough for even a cheapskate like myself. And Dilemma 2, how to store those floss drops when they're not actively in use for a project. This is where I think the real cons of this system come into play, but we'll talk about that a bit later. I pulled the trigger and invested in some tools. A basic paper cutter and a set of 3 hole punches because I wasn't sure what size I'd end up using. The biggest punch is an inch diameter, which I believe is what most people doing this use, but honestly, I tried that and it seemed way too big to me, especially once I realised that these cheapy hole punches would only punch precariously close to the edge. That's never gonna hold. On the bright side, the smallest punch was perfect for making these top holes where I'll be able to store the drops on metal rings. I did also play with adding a third hole for holding odds and ends of floss, but ultimately decided it didn't look nice. And also, I'm already used to tying those bits onto the same place as my main threads, so they can all fit in the main hole just fine. Anyway, I ran a few experiments, quickly settled on the 1/2 inch punch for the main hole like in this example here, and after a few more false starts size-wise, this is my final product. It's quite small, 1.5 inches wide, 1.75 inches tall, but you can see I've actually doubled it over to compensate for the precarious edge situation. My hypothesis goes that tying the floss on here will hold it closed so I don't need to worry about glue, and even with a couple of millimeters between the floss and oblivion, it's actually quite strong. As a side note, I'm not sure if I'm missing something here, but I've seen a lot of people talk about how they wish they could find or make bigger floss drops. So I'm kind of concerned that some inescapable flaw with my sizing will show up once I've spent hours and hours transferring everything to this new system. But if that happens, it happens. We live and learn, I guess. A lot of people make their drops out of fancy decorated card, but you know me, and I own a ton of plain white, so plain white it is gonna be. I'm not sure what weight this card is, but I'll look it up after filming and put it up on the screen for reference. This cutter gets through doubled up card just fine, so I'm chopping it all up into 1.5-inch strips because I am British and we're nothing if not confused about whether we prefer metric or imperial. Since I'm folding the drops in half, I need to chop these into 3.5-inch lengths. Foldy foldy. And now the fun bit, which I swear I am strong enough to do, but somehow just couldn't get my hands at the right angle. You would be surprised how difficult things can be with a tripod on the way, alright? Little hole at the top, and there we go. It's a floss drop. Okay, so a lot of the time when you see people do this in videos, they're conveniently starting from a nice brand new tidy skein. But mine are a little bit more haphazard. So the first task is to take off this tail of floss here where I've been using it and put that aside somewhere where it hopefully won't stick to my sleeve. In fact, you know what? Showing this with green on green was a bad choice. Hang on. Pro tip. With these DMC skeins, you always want to pull from the end with the number label on it. Don't ask me why it works better and tangles less, it just does. Some kind of skein winding wizardry at DMC HQ. This is where you really need to decide what length your pre-cut strands are going to be, because once you cut it, there is no going back. Personally, I'm a loop starter, so I like to use one strand of thread folded in half. What this means in practice is that I need my strands to be twice the length of someone who doesn't use the loop start. And in turn, that means my floss drops are going to take up more space and be more difficult to store. But I have tried other techniques and stitching with shorter threads, and it's just not for me. I'm willing to give up a little bit of space to make stitching from these things as friction-free as possible. To achieve a somewhat consistent length means I need something to wrap the floss around. So I've just folded another sheet of A3 cardboard in half lengthways, and this is about 16.5 inches long. The absolute ideal would have been 18 inches, but this is what I've got, and being a standard paper size, I'll always be able to reproduce it. So that's close enough, as they say, for government work. Hang on, because you definitely won't be able to see from this angle. I just sort of hold the loose tail against the top edge and then wrap around, letting the skein gently unwind itself. You'll notice immediately that I'm paying way too much attention to whether this is in frame and accidentally pulling it too tight around the cardboard. Literally the only time I've done that so far, and it's the one I filmed. But you get the idea, just do it better than I'm doing it. This one did go smoothly, but fair warning, you get the odd skein that loves to tangle up, so just be prepared with a light touch and a lot of patience. Past Michelle forgot to bring her scissors up from downstairs, so while she sorts that out, I'm just going to remind you that if you're enjoying this video, giving it a thumbs up will help it reach more people. And if you're not yet subscribed, clicking that button would validate my very existence. I think I hear her coming back. Okay, on we go. The thing you want to be very careful with here is to make sure you cut your strands at the end where that first loose tail was held when you started wrapping, which is tricksy when you've since put the whole thing down to go looking for scissors. But it's fine, I found it, we're all good. You could just slide the scissors in here or do like I do and take the threads off whatever you wrap them around completely. All that matters is you get a nice clean cut. I'm just pulling out the odd length left at the end and I'll tie that onto the floss drop separately and use it up first. Some people throw that away, but I have to be honest, that seems a little bit wasteful to me. So, I take the nice, neat, freshly cut floss, still folded over in the middle like so, and pass that loop through the hole in my little floss drop. Grab that loop around the back, open it up, and pull the tail through. And that's it. Beautiful. Now, normally I'd been writing the shade number on the drop before even taking floss out of its original labels, but I guess filming distracted me and I forgot, so let's do that now. Definitely recommend doing this part first though, just in case you misplace the label halfway through. I'm just tying on that extra weird length in the exact same way. It doesn't look quite as neat, but honestly doesn't bother me and I'd rather not waste the floss. Okay, so one down, just about 1 million to go. You know what this calls for, don't you? It's a montage. Once all the colours for your project are floss dropped up, you can add them to one of these metal binder rings that are super cheap on places like Amazon. The most common size I've seen recommended is 2 inches, but again, I seem to have scaled everything down a bit, so these ones are actually just a bit over 1.5 inches, and they will hold a lot. I would tend to put these in numerical order for ease of flicking through, but this is just for demonstration purposes. And speaking of demonstrations, I think it would probably be illegal for me to skip past the part where we remove a single strand from the floss drop. You've probably seen this before, but all you need to do is get your needle under a single strand going across the knot here and pull gently but firmly. The rest of the floss will curl up and you'll have a bit of a panic the first time, but as soon as that strand is out, bam, back to normal. And that is a nice pre-cut consistent length strand for my loop start. As a side note, I have seen people braid their floss like this, foregoing the actual drop part and just attaching straight to the ring. It also lets you keep the label, or you can get some specially designed pre-made floss drops that have space for you to keep the label too. But I kind of hate these labels, they're the bane of my existence. So I'm honestly so glad to be getting rid. So that is floss drops. Great for kitting up projects and working from, but we haven't really touched on dilemma 2 yet, which is how to store these things when they are not in use. The truth is, this is the part that really held me back from doing this for so long. But since I've embarked on this whole craft room rejigged, I figured there's no time like the present. Generally in the past, I've tended to have a lot of yarn on display even if it's not being used very much, and then I don't have anywhere to store my embroidery floss, which I use all the time. So I'm turning that on its head a bit this time. Like we said before, cutting my strands really long means more space needed to store my floss drops. And if space efficiency was really my goal here, I probably wouldn't have gone with floss drops in the first place. I would have stuck with something like bobbins. But just for once in my life, I'm gonna do something the aspirational way. I want my floss to be out on display and not hidden away in a box or a folder somewhere. I want it to take up space and be colourful and beautiful. And I want to be able to just easily pick up the bits I need and get on with stitching with the least hassle possible. I know, I want. But sometimes you've got to treat yourself, you know? So the general idea is to sort the flosses that aren't currently part of a project onto rings based on colour family, and then I'll hang them up in a beautiful rainbow against the white shelves. Or whitish shelves, at least. An important note here is that those shelves don't get direct sunlight at any point during the day, so I'm not too worried about colours fading. The floss will age more being out on display like this than it would if it was safely tucked away in a box, but that's just the price you pay for wanting any craft supply to be out on display. The length of my floss is way too long to fit in a single shelf, so this is where the big scary change is, because in an effort to better use the space, I'm taking out a shelf? This makes me feel very wrong, but I've already cut all the floss, so too late for backsies now. Okay, so ignore the rest of the shelves being a total disaster, we are midway through a craft room makeover after all. And this whole section might move somewhere else by the time I'm done, but in terms of self-contained floss storage system that is easy to access and looks pretty, I'm just gonna say, I think I've nailed it. I am really happy. All my floss is nicely organised. This undershelf basket is holding both my fledgling fabric collection and some unfinished FOs that were previously living in a literal rubbish bin. There is a place planned for beads, needles, all those other little extraneous bits and pieces, but that's still on order, so I guess you'll just have to come back next week for the full room reveal. How's that for suspense, Marie? And you know what? You have not even seen the best part yet. Come with me. See, I do most of my stitching on the couch on a night while we watch TV or he plays games or whatever, and so I end up dropping bits on the floor and wondering where they went, not to mention the amount of stuff you can reasonably lose inside an hoodie. But no more. I attached a couple of command hooks to the underside of this shelf, and now all I need to do is hang my ring of floss drops up here and I can easily reach them and they have an actual place to live that isn't down the back of a cushion somewhere. What can I say? It's the little things in life, right? Alright, I hope this was helpful or interesting or ideally both, and I'll definitely make sure to report back sometime soon and let you know how this whole thing is working in practice. In the meantime then, have a brilliant rest of your day and keep making cool stuff. Bye!